In this week's video version of our podcast, Trail Cam Radio, we're sitting down with accomplished whitetail deer hunter Justin Hollandsworth. Justin has been hunting whitetails for a couple decades now in many states across the Midwest and consistently finds success. In this interview, we're sitting down to talk with him about using Ebikes, October success, and hunting the moon. If you guys enjoy it, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe.
Lights,
camera,
follow the trail.
ready to shoot.
If you know where a deer's bedding and you know where he's eating, that deer should be dead.
Camera.
If you're passive on a deer, what you're doing is you're teaching them.
I've got 30 bucks in the Michigan record book. Everyone but one has had at least one previous wound on his body. Some had as many as 4.
Trail Cam Radio from the guys at Exodus.
Okay, we are live with Trail Cam Radio. We are sitting in the home of Justin Hollandsworth of Lone Wolf Custom Gear, Whitetail Addictions web show. A man with a really impressive whitetail resume. I've kind of known Justin, or as I guess an acquaintance. It's been four years, I think.
Yeah, probably good. Probably good 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, so known him a little while. Super awesome dude. But today there's a couple things we want to talk about. We want to talk about e-bikes, how you're using e-bikes, access, entry, exits, how you're using run cameras, your October success, and then I really want to pick your brain on the moon. So
Okay.
You've been a pretty popular guy the last I don't know, I'm gonna say last month. It seems like you've been like on the podcast circuit.
Yeah, it's been kind of weird too, to be honest, because it went from like I've always kind of been behind the scenes, you know, for most of it, and then all of a sudden, like, yeah, just between Whitetail Addictions and, you know, custom gear and, you know, just getting I guess more exposure or whatever. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes I like I like to hide a little bit too.
I can respect that. I guess before we get too far into this, you know, you're coming from like the DeQuesto lineage, mobile hunting. So give people like, I guess, a background on kind of, you know, your own style and a little bit how you do things.
Okay. Well, so, you know, started off hunting as a kid, just like, you know, we all do. I think I killed my first buck with a bow when I was 15, and then went for a long time and didn't have a lot of success. You know, had a lot of struggles trying to figure things out. Got frustrated with the sport. At one point, I got really heavily involved in. I was really into coon hunting and the competition part of it and training dogs. I really got real heavy into that. And then, you know, my early 20s and stuff like that, it was more, you know, I was busy trying to, like, you know, get my career started and stuff like that, and kind of swayed away from, I honestly got out of bow hunting for a while and got heavy back into it when I was about 25. A good friend of mine by the name of Gary Sparks, he was always on me like, dude, I can't believe you don't hunt anymore, or, you know, this and that. So finally I broke down and went a couple times with him, and it was like, why haven't I been doing this? Like, why did I stop? And I think you get, you know, I just didn't have a success, not the kind that I wanted. And I think a lot of it too was I wasn't around the right people. Mm-hmm. And not hunting the right properties and stuff too. Like, I didn't have properties that were, I don't know, maybe they had some big bucks on it or whatever, but I just didn't know what I was doing. Right. That's all there was to it. Mm-hmm. So, got back into it real heavy. And where I grew up in north central Ohio, at that time growing up, there was not a lot of deer. The deer population was really low. So it was a big deal when you went out and seen a couple of deer. 97 or 98, I moved to the Columbus area and got back into it. And I just started seeing a lot more big deer, started having more opportunities. I'd killed a couple nice bucks, couple Pope and Young class bucks, and that's really what I wanted to do. And then in the sometime early 2000s or so, that's when I became friends with Andre DeQuesto, and I don't know, for whatever reason to this day, like, he took a liking to me. I thought of him as a mentor, and we just hit it off. And I mean, we probably talk. I would say, you can ask my wife. She's like, "Oh, your boyfriend's calling again." So we get a lot of crap over that, but. And that friendship's different. It's not just about hunting now. It's we talk about everything from family to work to whatever. But and we started to, I just picked up on a lot of the things that he was doing. And when I started taking the tools that he, invented and putting them to use in the way that, they were meant to be used in that mobile style hunting, and bouncing around and hunting the freshest sign, and that's when my success went way up.
I think anybody that's been around Andre or Cody and have maybe less experience, but are experienced enough to know, like, when someone is kind of full of crap or just saying words because they're buzzwords and they hear other people say them and they want to kind of fit in as or be thought of as somebody. Cody, they just think about things differently. Like, when they go in and they're trying to manipulate a set or looking at a situation or thinking about a deer, like, the questions they ask themselves are just different. And I think some of that is just talent. Like, there's people that are born with certain talents and God-given abilities. Some people are more athletic. I think those guys, for whatever reason, like, they were meant to hunt. Like, there's no question.
100%. And it's kind of cool too now, like, because I've known Cody since he was a little kid, and he wasn't hunting. He wasn't even hunting then. He was like into, extreme sports, yeah, and like dirt bikes and like I remember him being all into that kind of stuff, and it was funny. And I remember talking to Andre about that too. It was like, man, he's like, I wish Cody would start hunting, and I remember him talking about that because Ashley was the hunter. She was the killer. Yeah. I mean, Ashley's killed a couple booners and some other really nice deer, and so. Then when Cody got into it, it was like he went from like 0 to 100, and then, and I think he only hunted maybe a year or two with the old man, and then he was like, "No, I'm gonna do my own thing." And it's cool to see now. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of things that he does that are similar to his dad, but he's also adopted his own style. And that's why, you listen to, our podcast, and you listen to those two, and that's why, there's definitely a father and son atmosphere going on with those two sometimes.
Yeah, that's funny. We were talking about that a little earlier, some of the comical stuff that goes on that some people, whatever we pick up on or whatnot.
Well, because we know them, and we know, like, they get, like any father and son, I get agitated with my own dad, so.
So that's all good stuff. One of the things, we were shooting this whitetail cribs, and obviously we've done some content stuff with you in the past, but one of the things that I feel like every serious bow hunter or whitetail hunter is trying to accomplish is killing big deer or good deer consistently in October. Like, that's one thing that everyone strives for. Like, there's a lot of guys that have success in November. There's guys that have success in the late season, but it's always like there's all this stuff about bow hunting in October, like why the success rate is lower, don't hunt in the mornings, don't do this, don't do that. And we kind of look at your body of work, and the vast majority of it's in October. Like, probably before that pre-rut, would you say? Like the pre-rut time frame?
I would say, if I had to guess, out of the bucks that I've killed, I would say 60% of them have been killed before October 20th. That's it.
So that's a number on that, like 12, 13 deer out of 20, something like that.
Yeah, somewhere right, right around there.
Yeah.
To me, I work so hard at pinning down. I don't hunt. I wouldn't say I hunt one deer. I usually like to try to find like 2 or 3, because I've been down those paths before of like just hunting that one, and sometimes that's a tough situation. I try to always stick to my number one, but I always have a 2 or 3 that if I get a crack at, I'm gonna shoot. So
Right.
I work my tail off to know as much as I can about those deer, and typically those deer I've known for several years, 2, 3, 4 years prior to killing them. So I know a lot of their tendencies. Maybe from, I'm super into keeping detailed trail cam records. There's a lot of truth in like deer doing certain things at the same time each year, same location, all those types of things. But the one thing I really try to do is stay patient, and I will, I don't, if that deer is not, if a particular buck is not doing what I want in the first 5 days of the season, well, I'm not going to go hunting. I'm going to stay back. I'm patient when it comes to that early part of the season, because when I go in, I'd never go in thinking that I might get a crack. I go in every single time thinking I'm going to kill that buck tonight. I mean, and then you got to have that confidence in knowing that, when I go in there, I'm going in there for a reason, and that is to kill that deer because of all the information that I've gathered to this point.
So there's a couple things there. One, you mentioned you're not necessarily finding a new deer in summer and then hunting him in the first 5 days. These are deer that you've kind of collected data with your trail cameras, or in stand sightings or whatever. But you have detailed notes where these specific deer. What kind of what kind of stuff are you? Well, I guess what kind of data points are you actually gathering and kind of referencing back for that next year? Like, are you looking at? Obviously, you're probably looking at weather. You're probably looking at direction of travel. But collectively, like, how are you breaking that stuff down? Or I guess how are you assembling it, and then how are you breaking it down?
Well, so I look at, keeping the detailed trail cam records. That's going to give me like certain dates, some dates in mind where I'm just keeping track of like a deer doing a certain thing at a certain time. The moon is a big factor in those early season hunts. Those 4 days prior going into a full moon, I kind of look at it like this. Here's your full moon. You got a day before that full moon and a day after. Those 3 days in there, they're typically never that great for me. I don't know why that is. It's just not. But the 4 days prior to that full moon, in those 3 days, the evenings are phenomenal. Always are. And then the 4 days after those 3 days, that window right there is really good in the mornings. And so I just take all those things in consideration, but I also look at trying to manipulate a spot to where I know I have a general idea where the deer's at, where he's bedding. And I'm trying to hunt that deer with some kind of wind that's good for him and that's good for me. And I will just stay out until I get maybe not every one of those things in my favor. Even with the cold front, maybe it's a little warm, but I got a moon and I got some information that deer's been coming through there, and I got the wind. Now I'm going to hunt him. Or maybe it's, but the one thing that I always try to do is that I think the wind is the most important factor in it all. I think by giving them that false sense of security and hunting that edge wind and flirting with disaster, that's when I see most of the deer that I end up killing.
elaborate on that a little bit, because that's one of the things that, that's one of the things that took me the longest to learn. And I think that sometimes people talk about hunting off winds or giving the deer the wind, but they don't really understand what it means.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what that means for you and the deer?
So to me, it's if I had an example, say I'm set up on a fence row that's running east to west. The wind is coming out of the west and going east. But I'm set up to where there's some kind of structure that might block the deer off from getting too far east of me to be able to get my wind. So I look at it as if I have a deer, maybe he's coming from the east, or maybe he's coming from the southeast or even south, something where he's got enough to feel comfortable to move during daylight hours into that location that I've kind of manipulated. And I hunt a lot of small pieces. Like the buck I killed last year, I killed that deer on 3 acres. And I typically have food plots in most of these spots, with always something in mind as far as like where the deer's coming from, what tree or trees that I can get in for those winds where it's good for him and good for me at the same time to be able to feel comfortable enough to come in that location.
Yeah.
And I just stay patient and I just stay out. And typically, if I've hunted that deer 3 times, I'm probably not going to kill him, and I typically have to back off. I might back off for a little while, because especially during the early season. Now, when it gets closer to like late October or even the rut, then the gloves come off and you got to get aggressive and go after them, because God knows where they're going to be.
Yeah.
But during those first, I'd say 20 days of season, that time frame in there is you just got to stay patient.
So there's which is, I'm surprised that this is the direction the conversation is going, right? Because everyone hears about the DeQuesto way, bump and dump, hunting beds, do this, and the mobile style, beast style hunting. Like that's like everyone's crazy about going in and finding beds everywhere, and you're saying it's a little bit different. It's a little bit situational to your strategy. But there's a couple things I want to touch on. One is, you said that if a deer's not doing something within the first few days, 5 days of the season, like you're remaining patient. What are those? Like explain or elaborate. Like what do you need to
that
actually
deer to do?
Yeah. Like what's the signal? It's like, all right, I'm going in to hunt them.
I love cell cams. I mean, I'm super busy. Cell cams have been huge for me, because I hunt here at home. I'm hunting 10, 12 different properties in 4 or 5 different counties. So I can't be running around like at every one of these properties pulling SD cards all the time. I can't. Since we've been on the phone, my boss has called me. Like there's always I'm just a busy guy with work and family and everything. So that to me, those cell cams have become huge. And some guys might frown upon that and might look at it as maybe that's not hunting, but it's still hunting to me, because it's it's my style. Everybody's got their own style. Yep. And I don't frown on anybody's style. I mean, you got your way, and if that works for you, good. Keep doing it.
Right. Agreed. And
that's huge. That's huge to me, is having that most recent information. And if I get that, that gray picture,
that's it,
of a deer, then I'm hunting that deer the next day, 100%, based on what the moon's doing. The moon was going to dictate a lot what I do too during the early season. If it's a gray picture in the evening with a rising moon, then I'm hunting that deer in the evening. And if it's but if that deer, if it's a good moon for a morning phase, and and that deer's over there, and I'm getting trail cam pictures every night, but he's not walking around in the mornings, but he's walking around at night, and he's not walking around in the evenings either. Just because he's in there, I'm not hunting him.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just staying out, letting him have his way, and then when I make my move, it's going to be all or nothing kind of thing.
The moon is something that I definitely want to get your perspective on, and it's one of those things that I feel like it's like people have drawn a line in the sand, and like the moon's a big deal, or it's like it means nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most guys, and you probably agree, that weather's it,
For
cold
sure.
fronts, but the moon is just like something that could influence movement, whether it's phase, transit times, whatever you want to talk about. But without, that's one of the things that I have a hard time, because I'm a numbers guy, like not super analytical, but kind of analytical. And without having okay, is there science behind it or is there not science behind it? Like, did that deer move was he up 10 minutes early and moving because of the moon, or was he just hungry? Or was it something else? You know what I mean? Like, there's all these questions.
Well, one of the things that is very interesting to me, okay, for example, last year I ran 18 cell cams.
Damn.
So you can, if you have that information pumping to your phone all the time,
mm-hmm.
and you're paying attention to those moon phases, you can see things start to happen.
Yes. Yep.
Even with warmer conditions or whatever, you see this pattern. I mean, and say, like last year I ran 18 cell cameras, and that was, spread out over 10 or 12 properties on 4 or 5 different counties, plus on a farm on a lease that we have in Illinois, out there, and I could see like this whole thing starting to develop with these deer, and on say 5 different farms, you got 5 different shooters, and they're all getting on their feet in daylight hours, mm-hmm. and it has to do with that moon. That's the only thing that the weather hasn't changed at all. It's
mm-hmm.
still the same.
Yep.
And it's 60 degrees, and it's been 60 degrees for 2 weeks. But all of a sudden, these deer are getting on their feet, and you get this good rising moon. Well, that's the only thing it can be,
right. So are you paying attention to, is it like the phase of the moon, or is it the transit times, like the overhead underfoot times, or is it both? Like, are there two?
A little bit of both, but more, just to me, it's just more like I was saying, like those 4 days going into that full moon,
mm-hmm.
and then 4 days after that full moon.
Uh-huh.
Like that time span, whatever, right in there, just seems to be the best. I don't know why. It just is.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like I said, everyone has like a different take on it. We've talked to guys that, they'll only hunt, or they kill most of their deer with a new moon.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, I don't know. That's when they kill their deer. So there's just a lot of, and one of the overhead underfoot thing is when I started, I guess when I first met Cody, like he was talking about this stuff. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? You know what I mean? Then we started paying attention to it, and I think that there is something there. I mean, I've seen it, right? Like I've mm-hmm. seen an overhead moon or overhead moon, like in the evening, 4:30, and a 170-inch deer walk by or underneath it for the deer was never moved that early ever, and all of a sudden, 10 minutes after that overhead moon, like he's coming, he's 100 yards from his bed. Like, what, like, the only time he's ever done that. So it's like,
but I've seen deer during the early season, like say the moon phase, like say it's like you're gonna get the peak moon phase for that day is say like 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock, and it's early season, and I would be at work, and all of a sudden my phone goes off, and there's a giant buck
mm-hmm.
walking around. I mean, so. And then he does it the following day too, and it's like October 10th or something like that. Well, nothing's changed. The weather stayed the same. All conditions have stayed the same. That's the only thing that has changed. So it has to. I mean, just has to be.
Right.
I mean, that's the only thing that's made sense to me.
Yeah. Like I said, it's interesting to hear people's take on it, for sure. And I think at some point someone's going to come up with some type. I mean, I know Adam has like the moon dial mm-hmm. or the whatever. What's that thing called? Is moon dial? Is
the moon guide.
Or moon guide.
Yeah.
I think who had it before? Jeff Murphy?
Murray.
Or Murray. Yeah, maybe that was his moon dial or whatever. Anyways, we got off track there a little bit. I want to circle back to the October stuff. So we're looking at like the first 10 days of the season. That's what you're looking for, being patient before you're going in and making a move. As you get into that mid-October range, obviously food sources are changing. The photo period's dropping. Test levels are starting to rise. What changes for you from like the 10th to, let's say, like the 20? I guess before pre-rut, so like the 10th to the 20th, 10th to the 23rd, 24th, somewhere in there.
Honestly, nothing in that time frame really changes me. I still kind of just rely, on trying to get that most recent information and set back and just being patient during that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
I just never, I just wanted. Years ago, I just wanted to be out there all the time and hunt. And the thing that I was figuring out that I was just screwing up my spots, because a lot of my places that I hunt, it's one thing if somebody owns like a 500-acre farm and they're just out there hunting all the time. Well, I feel like they could probably get away with it a little bit more than I can, where, maybe I'm hunting a 30-acre piece. Well, I can't pound that all the time. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to be burn up real quick. And so that's where I've kind of figured where if I just stay patient and just stay back and let things develop, like either on my cameras or maybe from sightings, sometimes maybe I'll just go and do an observation set and just kind of see what's going on or whatever. And then maybe, make a move the following day or something like that. But then once you get to about the 23rd, that's when I start. I tend to start hunting a lot more mornings. I will say this. I think, and like you said earlier, like somebody wrote something about like not hunting mornings in early October, and I don't know why or where that came from, but I think it's a mistake. I think you're taking chances away from yourself by not doing that. But you also have to be smart about it, because you could take chances away from yourself by being stupid about hunting those early mornings and not knowing when a deer is on their feet and when they're on their belly, and how to hunt them according to, to those two things.
Well, explain that. So when is it okay to go in and hunt? When would be an acceptable time to go in and hunt in October morning?
So if you know where a particular deer, say you got a general idea of where that deer is bedding in a morning, and if you have access to get in there where you're not, coming through a field or not coming through, a food plot or whatever that might be, where you could slip in, say you slip in a creek bottom or whatever it might be, and get in there when you got a moon, say you got a moon phase and it shows those deer up on their feet feeding in the morning. That's the time that you want to slip back in there and wait on them to come back.
So when you are going into a spot like that, being mobile, is that you being mobile and hanging that set the night before? Because I know a lot of guys do that. They'll go in and scout, hang a set for an evening hunt, throw a morning hunt at it, and then if nothing's shaking, then they're popping around. Or is that hanging a set in the dark, killing the deer between A and B, or is it like closer to his bed? Or explain.
I hate hanging a stand in the dark in the morning. To me, how many times have you ever hung a set and it gets light and you're like, I cannot shoot anywhere in there?
All the time.
It's like, this is pointless.
Yep.
But what I do like to do is have some general ideas of some potential spots where some deer bed from years of hunting that farm, or maybe, something I've learned from, scouting or whatever during the spring. And there's times where I'll go in and prepare trees.
Yeah.
I might just go through and just, trim out some stuff. And then if I'm thinking that deer's coming from there, then when I go in and make my move, I'll jump up in that tree. Everything's already, it's trimmed out enough to shoot anyways. It might kind of grown in a little bit or whatever, but at least I got a chance, because there's nothing worse. I've had those mornings where I've tried to slip in before, and you get in, and then you're like, God, I got to cut that branch. Next thing you know, it's almost daylight, and you're still in there jacking around,
Right.
trying to get enough room to, sling an arrow, and then you don't see your deer.
No, that's a super good point, because I think for anyone like playing that scenario through their mind, it's telling them, hey, it's mid-July. Like, if you need to go in and like manipulate that spot or do some prep work before the season, now's like, go do it.
Oh, for sure.
Go get it done now. Like, don't wait. Yeah, that's again, that's another interesting perspective, because I think a lot of guys, they're so focused on like the hang and bang stuff, being mobile, that there is still some thought that goes into where your stand placement is before the season. It's not always scout, hang, fresh sign, hunt.
Yeah.
Like there's still some other another side to that. I think being mobile is just as important, being mobile on a piece that you have a lot of experience with, is just having the option of being in any tree, right? Like, there's not a fixed location. Like, that's the draw to it. So interesting thoughts there. When we were downstairs, kind of going over some of your deer, you said that, I thought it was kind of funny that, if you get into that late October kind of time frame, like, that's when you start to, like, you kind of freak out a little bit and stress out, and it's
anxiety sets in for me.
Right. Explain, because typically guys are like, oh my God, November 1st, I'm taking my 10-day vacation, I'm taking my rutcation, let's go have fun.
I just don't look at it like that. Just because I'm always hunting a specific deer or 2 or 3 possibly, that to me, if I don't have one of those deer down, now I'm like, oh shit, here we go. Like, you know what? Time's running out, because this deer is going to be God knows where real quick. Mm-hmm. And if I don't get them down, maybe I only got 20 acres to hunt that deer on. Well, I mean, it's nothing for a deer to get off 20 acres and go roam, 200 acres somewhere. I seriously get some anxiety if I don't have my deer down by that time frame, because everything's about to change. My whole style of hunting's about to change, because I went from being more methodical in my game plan to now I'm like, okay, now I got to go hunt does. Now I got to go hunt some downwind side of some bedding areas. Now I got to, hunt like more like pinch points, and because the rut is just it's luck. I mean, I got bucks downstairs that, I made some moves to get myself in position, but it was all just based upon terrain features of why I was going over that direction, because that's the way that the deer were moving. It wasn't the fact that, like, I played the game with that deer straight up and beat him. It was just, he was looking for girls. Mm-hmm. And I hunted the terrain features that put me where they like to move through at certain times.
Right. No, I think that makes sense. But, I mean, coming from, I guess, Ohio, one buck state, and, some of those deer you have from, Iowa, Kansas, Illinois. I mean, you're hunting multiple states. Mm-hmm. So that you still don't see, like, November as an opportunity to go out and, hunt those other states where you have less experience or less.
For sure. That's when I leave, typically.
Okay.
I typically spend October, like, I love hunting here at home. And then once I get to either I kill a buck, or it gets to be, late October or anytime during November, that's when I take off and go, because I like hunting out of state. I know one thing that a lot of guys don't talk about is it's almost like we're not allowed to talk about this, is baiting. Mm-hmm. If you live in Ohio, everybody's running a corn pile on every piece of property around. Yep. And nobody ever talks about it. Mm-hmm. Do I run corn? Yeah, I run corn. It's a tool, mm-hmm. And it's legal to do so. And if I don't do it, every other neighbor around is running corn. So it's, but for me, like, when I go out of state, like to Illinois and Iowa, there's none of that. You're just hunting straight up, you're hunting them on strictly their terms at that point, and they're not dictated by some corn pile or where that's why I love those two states. That's why I love hunting those. I've hunted Kansas a fair amount too, but there's a ton of baiting going on in Kansas.
What do you think? I mean, there is a stigma about hunting corn piles, or not even. I'm not even gonna say hunting corn piles. When someone is running bait, there's a stigma with it, and like we talk about it in the office, it's like guys want to kill deer, and you're right, it's a tool, and it's no different. Like food is food, okay? It doesn't matter if it's a corn pile, food plot, ag field. Like it's still a destination food source. It could be a white oak tree, whatever. It's like it's food, a destination food source. But there's still a stigma about it. It's like guy kills a big deer. I shot him over a corn pile.
Yeah.
Like where do you think that comes from? Is that just like an ego thing, like with whitetail hunters? Or
yeah, I do. I think for sure that's an ego thing with whitetail hunters. I think that's I guess if you're using corn, guys, there's a lot of guys that just have this idea, especially guys that live in states that can't use corn.
They're jealous.
Yeah, because they know. Yeah. I mean, it's a deadly tactic. But I'm going to tell you, you guys know. You guys are Ohio guys. These deer know. These old bucks, they know what's up with these corn piles.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's a lot of times you're not killing that deer right over those things. There's no way.
Yeah, and I think that's what I wanted to get out of that question. That's the biggest misconception is, guys that are killing good deer and big deer consistently here, and if they are using bait as a tool, like they're not, you're not hunting over a corn pile. You're using it as a destination to figure out where the deer's coming from. Well, how's he using the terrain? Blah blah blah, and then you make your move and kill him. But you're like when you're hunting these small pieces. I mean, if you were to get up in a helicopter and fly around the first week in November, you're going to see piles of yellow, gold. Like there's just going to be piles everywhere on these small pieces. So you're almost to the point where it's almost by default. Like it's one of the things that it's kind of forced into your hand. At least in this state. I think when you get in the bigger chunks of ground, I think that changes a little bit.
Yeah.
But when you're in the majority of the state, Ohio is one of the most populated as far as population density. It's like 7th on the out of the entire country.
Well, that's what so many people don't realize. Like there are so many people and so many hunters here.
Yeah,
it's crazy. When I go to Iowa or Illinois or Kansas, it's awesome because there's not a lot of people, and right. I almost feel like a lot of times like I'm like, oh yeah, this feels more like hunting, just because of just the there's just not so many guys around just pounding the ground, and you look at Ohio too. It's like it's funny because you hear this about Iowa all the time. It's like, oh, there's a 150 behind every tree. Well, there's a lot of people think that same thing about Ohio, and it's like, come on. I mean, I might have 10 or 12 properties to hunt, and out of those 10 or 12, there's maybe 5
right
that are over that mark, and I mean, they're hard to come by, and you look at here, I mean, it's a cheap tag.
It's too cheap.
It's way too cheap.
Yeah.
Because I just bought a $700 Iowa tag with points and everything, and I think we should be more in line with those prices of the Illinois, Kansas, and Iowa.
It should be a $500 tag. I mean, it's a destination state. It's my problem is, and I guess it's not even a problem, but Ohio is like the first big buck state into the Midwest. So you have all the East Coast traffic. Like you're not going to drive through Ohio to hunt Indiana or Illinois. Yeah. Like maybe you're on Illinois, but you're damn sure the majority of people are going to stop in Ohio.
For sure.
So I think that's where a lot of the influx of, non-resident hunters come from is people traveling west from the East Coast. Ohio's the first big buck state.
I think there's a lot of money for them to be made. I think they're still going to get the same numbers of guys.
It's funny because we have some people that we know that are COs or they work with the Department of Natural Resources, and that's my perspective on it too. Like increase the fees. Maybe you lose 15% of, the people buying licenses, but if it's increased by 50%, you're making a hell of a lot more money. And their thought on this is exactly it's the exact opposite. They're like, oh, people aren't willing to pay that much money. They're not gonna.
I don't know. I don't believe that to be true. Mine's opposite of that, and I also think if they're paying more money, I think we're going to get better hunters.
Quality. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Totally agree.
I mean, I think they're going to be, I think they're going to be more invested in it too, and possibly even be, I think it could even make the age structure even better with the bucks, just because if you're going to pay those kind of rates, then you're going to hold out for a much better deer too.
Yeah,
possibly.
I think that there's probably, I think that goes either way. I think that there's probably guys, I paid $500, like I'm last day or whatever. I'm shooting. Yeah, I'm shooting something, But I understand what you're saying, and I would tend to agree with that too. Yeah, like, I can pay $500. I'm gonna hold out and see what happens. Okay, we got way off topic. We need to circle way back. But I wrote something down on my notes that you mentioned earlier. Hunting all these small pieces, and I guess that's how we kind of got into this, was small pieces, being patient, and like minimizing pressure. Mm-hmm. I know you're a big advocate of Ebikes. Mm-hmm. It's something new that, I don't necessarily. They've been out for a while, but I think the social acceptance or market acceptance is starting to creep up there a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about it. Yeah. We've messed around with them. Between the company, there's probably 10 of them floating around somewhere, but in areas that I hunt, they're illegal. Can't use them. So talk about it. Talk about how you're using them. I've
been using an electric bike for, this is going to be either my third or fourth season now. And a good friend of mine, Steve Pinkston, he has a bike company called Hardcore E-Cycles. And I'd had another brand before, and it was just, it never had enough power to get through the mud or up the hills and those types of things or whatever. But I already had the concept of it, though. It was like, man, this is awesome. Mm-hmm. Because, I can creep in, on these spots and not lay any ground scent and not get all sweated up going into these spots or whatever. But it just never had the power. Well, then Steve started his company, and Steve literally lives like 3-4 miles down the road from here, and when he got the bikes that he has now, they're all rear hub driven, and man, they have crazy power. Like, I climbed a couple hills over in Illinois, and it was I'm either going to flip it because I can't keep the front end down, or I'm going to make it up the hill. Yeah. And I made it up some hills that I was shocked that I got up them. But to me, the biggest, when you're, everybody's always talked about the first time in is the best time in. Mm-hmm. And to me, it all comes down to, the first time in is the best time in, because the fact of you're laying ground scent going in and out. Now, you didn't kill that deer. Now he's got a chance to cross your path where you walked in, and you might have tipped him off at that point. With that bike, you don't lay any ground scent down. I think you can hunt a stand or a location or bounce around on a deer. You can get, instead of that first time in being the best time, I think you can get 8-10 hunts without tipping off the deer, possibly, from that. The other thing I like about it too is, that bike acts like as an air conditioning unit going in. I mean, one of the biggest things, going in and out, we're always, trying to stay, as, I don't go crazy into the whole scent thing. I'm not into the ozones, and I don't do any of the sprays or nothing like that. Like, I just felt like those are all just time-consuming things that just don't. I've never seen the benefits from any of that stuff. And I've played around with some of that stuff and thought, well, it would kind of give you the edge or whatever. Why not? It's just too much. It's too time-consuming. But this, you got a bike and you're riding it in. It's like an air conditioning unit. You are staying cool the entire way in, never busting a sweat. and then you can climb in the tree and just be fresh and clean, because I do like to shower before every morning hunt and every evening hunt. I do like to be really clean. I think that part of it is super important. But having that bike keeps me clean. You know, I don't get sweated up like I used to.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I've killed a couple bucks where I've rode in on a path, and before that deer ever got there, here comes five does, 2 fawns and 2 big old nanny does. Literally on the same path that I just walked in on, and they don't have a clue that I'm around, and I get away with it.
Right.
And getting away with beating them is a big part of your game and getting a crack at that big deer later.
Have you seen any like adverse effects from using them like in the whitetail woods? Because guys will say, "Oh, old John started the 4-wheeler, just drive the 4-wheeler." I mean, everyone has different takes on this. There's some guys that say, farm equipment. If deer's used to farm equipment, it's not going to bother deer. If deer's used to ATV, it's not going to spook a deer. So what's like a bicycle moving that fast is something that they're not used to, right? If they get a visual. I mean, have you had any?
I've never had that effect. That's the other thing. I mean, there's been times where it almost seems like it's confusing to them. I've had deer bedded in fence rows, and here I come, I'm cruising along, and then all of a sudden I spot them, and I see them there. As long as I'm not slowing down or like jerking my head around and making that hard eye contact with them, they will stay hunkered down, and I can just go right on by them.
Yeah.
But I've also been, and there is something with the farm equipment though. They just don't seem to give a shit about the farm equipment for whatever reason, and you can get away with a lot with that. Even in a pickup truck sometimes, you can get away with a lot. A 4-wheeler, I've been in bedding areas pinned down with a buck before with, several other deer around, and somebody on the next property over fires up their 4-wheeler because they're done hunting for the morning. And I'm telling you, those deer go from cool and calm to on edge.
Yeah.
That sound, they don't like it. I'm convinced of it, and that's I don't use one to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
I'll use one to pull a deer out.
Right.
But
yeah, I think it's, if there's any kind of, if the deer's ever had a negative connotation with anything, like they're going to associate that with danger, and I think that's just the way it is. Bob's driving his 4-wheeler in there every day with his, hunting the same tree stand, like the deer know that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's where things get a little bit interesting, because there's pieces where guys use ATVs and deer are okay with it. So.
The other thing about that e-bike too is the time saving.
That's yeah.
Say I'm hunting after work and I get held up and maybe get stuck on a phone call or whatever, and then I'm like, crap, I got to get in there. Well, maybe I got a long walk. I'm hustling, I'm getting in there, I'm all sweaty and trying to get in there in time, and I'm getting in there late, maybe blowing some deer, off wherever I might be going or whatever. Where with that bike, man, I'm there in seconds.
Right.
I mean, I can just rip in there and get right where I want to be, and then have have a chance of getting a crack at that deer later on.
So are you only using it for access basically, or are you using it for any type of scouting, running cameras?
Oh yeah,
are you using it for that too?
For sure, I use it all the time for scouting and cameras. Cameras, like, it used to take me a long time, like on a Saturday, before season. Like, I'm going to go on a Saturday and go check cards. And, I got an 11-year-old son, and, he was playing baseball and stuff like that before. So I would have to get up on a Saturday at 5 o'clock in the morning so I could have enough time and possibly do some damage even going to check these. But I had to be back because maybe he had a baseball game.
Mm-hmm.
Or whatever, and now with that bike, I cut that time in half. I can buzz through there. I mean, all these properties and have all those cards and ready to go and out of there. And the other thing is, like, I love the speed scout on them. because you can just buzz around the outside of these field edges and just spot check, locations where, just certain things that you're looking for because of past history from hunting properties and stuff like that. And just maybe there was a big deer that was making some rubs on an edge of, a thicket coming out into a cut cornfield the year before. And maybe you're just, you buzz over there. All of a sudden, those rubs are all reopened back up again. You're like, okay, here we go, And you never laid any ground scent, nothing. You get the hell out of there, and then formulate your game plan and go make a move on that deer.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think, the way you're using them lines up with your kind of more patient, methodical approach, through October and trying to keep pressure off these farms. Because they are small pieces. So I think all of that makes sense. What you keep talking about MRI, the most recent information. You mentioned you running a bunch of cellular cameras, kind of across a couple different states there.
Yep.
So what are you doing with the cameras on smaller pieces? And I'm kind of teeing this up because I already know, but kind of walk through your process of data collecting and how you're using that in season and towards, I guess, the next year.
So are you talking about just keeping records?
No, I mean actually physically, like the camera locations. Are you running cameras on food sources? Are they, scrapes? Like what does that look like for you?
A lot of the farms that I hunt, I have like small little micro food plots in there. Some of them are just small ones. Some of them are just like the Bill Winke poor man plots that I've done and went in there and just like busted my ass and sprayed them and weed eated them and put them in, and they're just little tiny kill plots, and I'll run them over that, run them over, corn or minerals. But I also use a lot of, I use mock scrapes. Heath Cisco kind of turned me on to this, of using a soft pine branch, zip tying it, and that's a great way to keep tabs on deer, especially as season starts clicking along, and because once those bucks find them, the little ones get started on them, and they take them over and do their thing, and then eventually the big boys come in there, and that's really good, like especially in states like Iowa and Illinois, where you can't run, mineral or bait.
Right. So on those food sources, on those mock scrapes, is that inventory purposes only, or is that like?
No, inventory, because I want to know what bucks are around, but I'm also watching, I'm looking at like where they're coming from. I might get a cell cam picture of a deer, and he might come in from, the northwest that night. Well, the first thing I do is I see that, and then I pick up my phone and I look to see what the wind was doing. And then maybe the next night, maybe he does it again. So I look again, and I just try to get an understanding and knowing those properties and knowing, okay, you know what, he's probably, if I had to guess, he's bedding over there on that point and coming out, and then coming into that plot and kind of working it that way. And so there's a lot of times where I start to formulate my game plan, and I'm also just already thinking about, okay, I know like I could probably get into a couple of those trees over there, kind of in between there and catch him in coming in there, because sometimes I don't like hunting those food plots so much, because a lot of people think that, I hear guys say, man, it's tough, we just don't have a lot of deer. Well, I hunt a lot of places that have a lot of deer, and it's really tough. Because you're covered up, you're going to get busted a lot more, and it's just harder to consistently get good hunts in those spots. That's one of the big reasons I do set back a lot of times, because it's not so much just about that deer that I'm trying to kill, it's all those other ones that are in there that you start tipping your hat to them all the time. Those big nanny does, they track you like a coon dog, and they're a pain in the ass.
That's a really important point, and it's something that probably is not talked about enough, because, you start hunting those food destinations. I mean, the does are going to get there first. They're going to get there earlier in the evening, and you start to put pressure on those, where those deer start to have, you start to get winded, or they pick up ground scent if you have bad access or whatever happens. like it doesn't take very long before they have a couple bad experiences like that, and then that movement is completely shut down or altered. Like they're doing something else, and now all of a sudden, like you've just kind of you've screwed yourself basically.
Oh yeah.
So how long did it take you to learn to like, okay, get off the destination? Let me go back a little bit between the bed to food.
I don't know. I think it was just something that happened just over, just gradually over time where, I wasn't having the success back, on like sitting right on top of those situations and having like the complete disasters of, does blowing and just the chaos and all that of, everything happening. So I just got to the point where I'm like, you know what, like, it just goes back to the old definition of insanity. So I'm going to just keep on doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
Right.
I'm like, I mean, that's not going to get it done.
Yeah.
I don't go into a season, thinking, man, I hope I get a big one this year. I go into a season like I'm going to kill a big buck this year.
Yep.
And hopefully multiple big bucks.
Yep.
And because you have a couple seasons where maybe you had, some bad luck, maybe you hit one, you didn't recover it, or maybe you missed one, or, I had one season, I had a 190-inch deer get hit by a car 2 weeks before season, and then started hunting another deer that was in the 160s, a big unicorn buck that he had a big tine coming straight out of his forehead. And I had several encounters with that deer and came really close to killing that buck as well, and then he got hit by a car. I had 2 in 1 year, and then I'm like, God, what am I going to do? And by the end of the season, it's January, so I go over and hunt some old bully buck that I had. That's like 130-something inches, and I go over there and missed him.
Yeah, that's a season you want to forget about.
And I'm like, God, I can't even kill that crapper,
Oh, that's funny. We've been going here for about an hour. I started to jump around a little bit at the end, but there's one thing that I wanted to ask as we were talking about the trail camera stuff before I jumped from the going back and not hunting on food sources. But you're running a bunch of cell cameras and you're running them some on food, some on mock scrapes. Are you pushing into like those transition or the staging areas, like when deer are starting to stage up from those bedding areas? Are you putting cameras in there? Is that too close? Are you pushing beyond that? Like
no, I don't usually go in there. No. Well, I'll sometimes go in August, and I'll put a cell cam in a couple locations and maybe build a couple mock scrapes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll put the best batteries that money can buy and those things, and then I let it go.
Yeah.
And I just stay out and I won't go in there unless it's November. And then when it's November, then I just get super aggressive and just go for it constantly.
Yep.
Because what do you got to lose?
Right.
I mean, but yeah, I'll set some cameras out in August, maybe even early September. Back in, I mean, there's sometimes I just go right into a bedding area and blow the deer out and just do my thing and make a mock scrape, put a cell cam in there, and and I mean, crap, I had 3 or 4 cameras out last year that I put them out in August, and I never took them down till March. They sat in there the whole time, just taking pictures and feeding me that information. All
it's pretty powerful stuff when it's unaltered like that.
Dude, that's I mean, you can't beat that.
Right.
I mean, I don't have to go in there because I know
Right.
a lot of what's going on in there, and that's been cool too, because there's been a lot of times I've had cameras out on the edges or whatever that I can check. I can drive up with my truck or my bike or whatever, and I don't have a picture of a certain deer, and then I'm sitting there, in the morning I wake up and I get some coffee and open up my phone and look, and I'm looking through pictures. I'm like, oh, he's back. He just showed up in there.
Yep.
And he's been in there for a couple days, but on those other cameras, I never had pictures of him.
Right.
Because I've seen that a lot of times too, where even during velvet, when I'm trying to get pictures of a deer, you could have it could be a 40-acre farm, and if you don't have that camera exactly where that deer is, you don't have any pictures of him, and you don't know it. I've pulled into a place before, and I'm just going to go over there and glass tonight. I haven't got anything good on camera over there yet, but I'll go over there and glass, and then pull in and go, oh, my God, where'd he come from?
Yeah. I think that probably happens more than what people realize.
Yeah.
Like, the camera's not, I mean, obviously we're advocates for cameras, but it's not the end-all, be-all solution to scouting by no means. And we're fortunate enough that we run a ton of them. And there's areas that we'll have cameras stacked because we have so many of them. We might have, maybe there's a spot where you have more than one camera on a tree just pointing, kind of different directions or whatever. Because there's something going on with the terrain there. But there's times where you could have two different cameras 20 yards apart, and one picks a deer up and the other one doesn't. And it's like, okay, well, if you were a guy that had 5 cameras and didn't have that opportunity to have a setup like that, you would never know.
No.
You would never know. So that's one of the things that we've started to talk about more is, when you're getting these photos and you're reviewing the videos and photos and collecting information, you're asking yourself, when, where, why, why is that deer there? You're asking yourself all that. But we're really starting to talk about, okay, if you're missing that information, you should be asking yourself the same questions, because you thought enough of that spot to hang a camera. Something's telling you that your scouting's telling you that it's a spot that deer is. Like, okay, why isn't he there?
I've went into an area before and just went in there and just, oh, holy shit, it's shredded in here. But I don't have pictures of a good deer at all. And I will say this, I've gotten so, I love cameras. I absolutely love them. They're one of the greatest scouting tools that's ever came out. But sometimes I have to take a step back and tell myself, you got to quit relying so much on cameras sometimes, because I will get into a bad habit of it at times of the year, a little bit. Because there's been those times where I walk in and I'm like, man, this place is shredded. I'm like, why am I not getting pictures of whatever buck this is? And then I'll set up and see the deer, and I'm like, I've not been getting any pictures of that deer at all. But I went in there and went old school and read the sign, and the deer was there the whole time. I was just so focused on nothing being there because I didn't have a picture of it.
Right. Yep. Right. Yeah. Agreed. So we're I guess we're an hour, a little over an hour in. We'll get this thing wrapped up, but before we do that, there's a question that we always ask. It's something we've been doing for a couple of weeks, and that is, we ask people what their favorite piece of content they've consumed over the last week. So it doesn't necessarily have to be whitetail related. It could be your favorite TV show. Maybe it's a podcast you listen to, whatever. So in the last week, what has been your favorite piece of content that you've consumed?
My favorite piece of content in the last week. I wouldn't say content, but I will say that I'm really addicted to listen to Joe Rogan podcast.
That was going to be my answer.
Really?
Yeah. Any specific episode?
I was watching some of the ones with Cam Haines, but there was one with Kevin Hart that was pretty good here recently. That was hilarious. There's actually one of them with she's a conservative, Candace Owens.
Yeah.
Super sharp.
Yep.
Has some really good perspectives on some things that I would almost like to see that woman run for president someday, because she's sharp.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to figure out, is Joe Rogan Democratic or Republican?
I think he's pretty libertarian, I guess, would be the correct term.
Okay.
I don't think he associates necessarily with a party. I think he's pretty open-minded.
He is, because he could sway one way or the other pretty quick.
Right. But interesting. You said that was going to be my answer. We listened to Adam Schiff. chef,
Yeah.
and economist on. That was the episode we listened to on the way down here. So it was a 3-hour haul down here. No, it wasn't a 3-hour haul. It was a 2-hour haul. The episode's 3 hours long. But anyways, that was going to be my answer too. So that's it. We're going to wrap this thing up. If anyone wants to learn more about you, Whitetail Addictions, where can they find more information?
You can go to Lone Wolf Custom Gear. I handle all the staff for that, and I also handle the staff for Whitetail Addictions, and I'm co-producer of that. Or catch me on Facebook or Instagram. It's Mason's Dad 1975. So that's I got my priorities. So, but yeah, no, and I appreciate you guys coming out and having me on. And
yeah, man, it was fun. Beautiful place, beautiful collection of deer, great body of work, incredible.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, folks, that's a wrap. If you want to learn more about Justin, go check him out. Whitetail Addictions, Lone Wolf Custom Gear. He has some cool stuff going on. We will talk to you next week.